Coming up, the vice presidential debate, the respective campaigns and parties are both claiming their candidate won.
The pandemic, health care, and the economy were major topics, and Vice President Mike Pence and challenger Senator Kamala Harris offered drastically different views on those topics. Tan Trung puts those opposing views in focus.
It's classic, he said.
But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first.
She said.
They knew and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax.
In their debate, Democratic Senator Kamala Harris and Republican Vice President Mike Pence made some sweeping statements in regard to the Trump administration's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country.
Citing history, too, Pence said the president's decision to suspend all travel to China likely saved millions of lives.
That decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II.
It's either the greatest presidential failure in U.S. history or the greatest mobilization since World War II.
Both camps are dealing in alternate realities, and that is not unusual.
Eyewitness News political analyst Clancy Dubose says the respective messages resonate with the party faithful.
Voters who watch debates tend to hear what they want to hear, which is why debates don't often move the needle.
Outrageous or not, the claims and messaging from both campaigns are targeting a very small percentage of undecided voters.
You've got between 5 and at the most 10% of the voters who either are undecided or might be willing to change.
With less than a month before Election Day, both campaigns will continue to sell their version of reality. What may be more important is the reality of the 5 to 10% undecided voters. How happy they are with their reality may very well determine the outcome of a bitter race. Tan Trung, Eyewitness News.
The Trump campaign is now protesting the decision to make the debates virtual moving forward by asking them to push them back 2 weeks. The Biden campaign, meanwhile, says it will not agree to delays.